the neoliberal project of the administration of the far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. This year, the demonstrators are defending their historic rights, which are being threatened by the current government. The Margaritas March is called every 4 years by a variety of movements and trade unions representing rural women. Our correspondent, Dana Galetti, has more from Brasilia.
We are here in the avenue of the ministries in Brasilia, where more than 100,000 women have been marching, not just rural women, but also indigenous women. They were demanding recent pensions, which they also have a right to, as well as free quality education, which was the theme of Tuesday's big march here in Brasilia. They were also marching in defense of water and land rights, in favor of agroecology and land reform, and against all the policies of President Jair Bolsonaro that they see as an attack on the rights they have won. The women are also protesting against gender violence. Brazil has one of the highest rates of femicides in the world, and that figure has risen even further this year. So those are the issues raised on this Margaritas March, which is named after Margarita Alves, an activist and agricultural worker who was murdered in 1983 and who struggled for many of the same causes.
We thank Danai for that report. Thousands of students and teachers marched in cities across Brazil on Tuesday to protest against proposed federal cuts in education spending. This was the third nationwide march against the cuts since they were proposed by President Jair Bolsonaro back in May. Our correspondent Brian Meir followed the demonstrators.
On August 13th, students and union members took to the streets of over 200 Brazilian cities to protest the far-right Bolsonaro government's proposed austerity cuts to the education system.
The risk of these cuts is that education will lose its public, democratic, and free characteristics. The backdrop of this education plan is the destruction of the public nature of Brazilian schools and universities. They don't want education to be a right for all. They want to transform it into a privilege for a few. So we are here to protest against this and guarantee that all Brazilian people can have access to schools and universities.
The protest was called Education Tsunami and was organized by student unions. It started early in the morning in small towns and moved to bigger cities as the day progressed. Thousands of people from all walks of life came out in solidarity with the students.
I'm here today for the future of my daughter. I have a 4-year-old daughter and I don't want her to live in a country that has a fascist president and a government. I love and fight for this country.
This was the third national student and teacher strike since Jair Bolsonaro became president. As his government becomes further and further engulfed in corruption scandals, the students hope these demonstrations can stop him from purging the educational curriculum of critical thinking and halt the austerity cuts.
We want to pressure the government, and I think that if we continue this fight, we will achieve results. We will be able to draw attention to the problem and reduce the cuts.
Brian Meir, Telesur, São Paulo.
The Argentine president, Mauricio Macri, is trying to appease voters after his big loss in Sunday's primary elections. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Sabrina Roth, has more.
Following announcements made by President Macri, the value of the peso has dropped again as the country's risk rating continues to rise. The president also apologized for his controversial media conference on Monday, where he blamed citizens for the economy's woes after he received widespread condemnation. Nonetheless, the new economic measures he announced on Wednesday are very much designed to sway voters in his favor and will last at most for 3 months, and it will not impact the finances of Argentinian households. Since Macri took power, the peso has devalued by 500%, as experts agree that due to this week's downturn, this year's inflation rate is expected to reach 50%. Meanwhile, during Macri's administration, salaries have remained stagnant in the face of rising inflation, while retirees and small and medium-sized businesses will hardly benefit from his newly announced measures.
So let's take a closer look at President Macri's measures to win back voters, which include tax breaks, bonuses, and a higher minimum wage. The threshold for employers and pensioners to begin paying income tax will rise by 20%. The government says that should benefit 2 million people with an extra $30 to $40 a month. Employees' contributions to Social Security will also be suspended for September and October, benefiting 6.5 million people who will see an extra $30 to $40 in their pockets. Informal workers will benefit through extra child benefits. 2.2 million parents will receive an extra $10 to $15 a month per child. Civil servants, the police, and members of the armed forces will get a bonus of $100 at the end of the month. And the minimum wage will rise, but the government still has to decide when and by how much. There are also benefits for small and medium-sized businesses and for students on grants. And gasoline prices will be frozen for 90 days. All these short-term measures run directly contrary to the terms of President Macri's $57 billion bailout agreement with the International Monetary Fund. But the IMF is likely to turn a blind eye, as it would certainly prefer a market-friendly Macri to be re-elected than deal with a return of the left. Moving on, at least six police officers have been shot in the United States city of Philadelphia. Most of North Philadelphia is gridlocked, and police say the scene is still active. They have asked people to avoid the area. And staying in the U.S., stock markets in the country have plunged. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has fallen 780 points in the course of the day, while Standard & Poor's lost almost 3%. New figures showing negative growth in Germany and Britain have stoked fears of a global recession. The U.S. trade war on China had already unnerved the markets. Coming up after the break, we'll speak to Dr. Blessed Ngwenya about the slavery reparations campaign. Don't go away.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transformed the world today. On Monday, only on Venezuela.
Welcome back to From the South. Venezuela continues to support the initiative by the community of the Caribbean, CARICOM, to demand reparations from European countries for their role in colonial slavery. In May of this year, delegates from around the world gathered in Caracas for the International Meeting on Slavery Reparations in an effort to strengthen the global reparations campaign. CARICOM's proposal has been strongly backed by the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, and coincides with reparations hearings in the U.S. The aim is to find a common strategy that would translate into concrete action. And to tell us more about the reparations campaign, we're joined live from Venezuela by Dr. Blessed Ngwenya, a professor at the University of South Africa whose research centers on global coloniality and its impact on Africa's histories. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us. Slavery reparations are back on the agenda. We've seen Venezuela joining the Caribbean community's fight for global reparations. In fact, in May of this year, an international meeting to discuss reparations for slavery was held in Caracas. What's your take on the reparations agenda, and what role do you think Venezuela and other countries can play in internationalizing the reparations campaign?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I think the issue of reparations is a very important one, and there is no need for a compromise. Reparations need to be done, but what is key is how we think about reparations. I think it is very important to talk about how do we begin to imagine reparations. Looking at the etymology of the word, reparations speak to restoration, reconciliation, restorative justice for historical injuries and injustices of the past. But of course there are some problems with that approach, because it assumes that injustices are in the past, yet they are continuing even today in different ways. But I think it is very important to understand that when we talk about reparation, we're talking about an injury to a people who were pushed out of the human realm. And when we talk about reparations, we should not only stick to the idea of a homo economicus. By that I'm trying to say it should not be only financial, because I know with reparations, especially in the 21st century, people look at a compensatory approach to reparations. But what is key for me, it is actually restoring people to human dignity. In as much as human beings are economic beings, they are also social beings. So these two should work hand in hand. And I think also Venezuela has had a decree on reparations, which is very, very important. But if the foundation is insecure and the foundation is only built on compensation, I don't think that is where to start, because the very same compensation in terms of like financial compensation can be eaten up by the very social injustices.
Now, there has been a move towards deepening African-Caribbean engagement. You know, recently we've seen African leaders from Ghana and Kenya paying official visits to the Caribbean as the Caribbean community, CARICOM, seeks to formalize cooperation with the African Union. Do you think this is a good idea?
Yes, it is a very great idea, because I think in this present age where we see a present imperialist assault on the global south, there's a need for solidarity, and this solidarity should cut across not only the issue of reparations, but it should also cut across other spheres of life, culturally, financially, also perhaps in terms of justice. But most importantly, I think it should be at the epistemic level, be the way we begin to think about things, the way we begin to produce knowledge, and then the way we understand where we are coming from as a people, particularly people in the global south who have been peripherized, who have been marginalized. Because we might try to say things have changed, but to be frank, when we look at we take a historical perspective, we realize that the very same interest that created the need for slavery, they still exist today. We have seen in so many ways this approach by the imperialists of extractivism. It started with extracting people. Today we know the extracting of resources such as minerals, such as oil, and some other countries are even under sanctions because of the resources they have, because they don't want to allow the imperialists to continue with their extractivist approach. So it is very important to have a global south solidarity across many spheres of engagement and life.
You know, we've also recently seen the U.S. hold congressional hearings to discuss reparations for slavery and subsequent laws that discriminated against Black people in the U.S. What then can the rest of the world learn from South Africa, which has undertaken a national public truth-telling initiative, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to address its long history of institutionalized racism?
I think that's an interesting question because when we talk about the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the starting point was the foundation to bring people back into the realm of the human. It was not compensatory in approach in terms of finances. I think that is one thing that is very key, that people look at ushering back people into the human realm. As I pointed out earlier on, that the same finances, if the foundation is not really built on human dignity, it will just go back to square one. In that, I'm trying to say the vulgarity of throwing money at people that have been injured should cease, because people cannot exist in the at the benevolence of their oppressors. So I think with its successes and perhaps failures, there's a lot to be learned from the TRC in South Africa.
Now, much as in the case of slavery, apartheid has left a legacy of discrimination in South Africa. What are some of these lingering effects, and is enough being done to address these concerns?
I'm thinking there's something that is being driven particularly by the student community in South Africa, which is infiltrating into universities in terms of curriculum, in terms of changing institutional form with regards to universities, and also intellectual content. That is decolonization. With decolonization, I think it is very key because it really looks into the foundational things, such as the colonial matrix of power, which hinges on control of authority, control of land, control of gender and sexuality, and also control of and production of knowledge. That is very key. I think that is going to the that approach, that is going to the root cause of things.
Now, Dr. Blessed, lastly, how would you define the term global coloniality, and what would you say is its impact on local histories in Africa?
When it comes to issues of global coloniality, at the local level, at times people believe that they make decisions independent of the international community, which cannot be further from the truth. What actually happens, dictates of the global superpowers actually shape what happens at the lower rung. Perhaps one should give an example. If one looks at imposition of sanctions, for instance, let's say the imperialists, they don't want a particular leader, and then they want to impose perhaps a leader of their choice who pursues their own interest. What they can actually do is maybe create some fictitious scarcity of commodities, or let alone maybe impose criminal sanctions. In the end, that directly impacts on the people. Like, for instance, let's say in hospitals there could be no medicines, perhaps spare parts, and so many things. But within the local level, especially when people exist on a false consciousness, they might blame their leaders, they might blame the economy, and divorce their thinking from the global working of things. So it is very important, especially just to refer back to the issue of solidarity, which I mentioned earlier on, that should begin also even perhaps. I am thinking of a Global South university, or thinking of a Global South perhaps a TV station or media, because cultural industries are very, very important, especially in for epistemic freedom, which I believe is the beginning point in any discussion, whether it's reparations or whether it's ushering people back into the realm of the human.
Dr. Blessed, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. We have been speaking with Dr. Blessed Ngwenya from Caracas, Venezuela. Still to come, Colombian senators travel to Cauca to investigate the murders of social leaders. Stay with us.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From the South. Trinidad and Tobago has appointed Alison West as Public Administration Minister after the previous office holder was charged for corruption last week. West will also retain her position as Junior Minister in the Ministry of Finance. Earlier this week, the government appointed Senator Garvin Simonet to the post. However, his swearing-in ceremony was cancelled after news surfaced that in 2014 he was arrested in the U.S. for driving under the influence. The original office holder, Marlene McDonald, is currently facing charges for misappropriation of state funds, along with her partner and 3 contractors.
Make it real.
For the first time in St. Kitts and Nevis crime-fighting history, gang members on the island have handed over 30 illegal guns to the police. 30 rounds of assorted ammunition was also handed over to law enforcement via a trusted third party. It's all part of the government's ongoing peace initiative. Both the Prime Minister and the Commissioner of Police have described the development as a major breakthrough in the fight against crime.
The last batch of weapons was secured last Friday, August 9. And I understand that this batch of 30 guns was given up voluntarily as a demonstration of the commitment by gang members to the peace of our beloved country.
To date, the police have received 30 firearms and 73 rounds of sorted ammunition. Such an exercise has never taken place in the history of the police force or our country. These weapons will undergo a process and will subsequently be destroyed.
The Peace Commission of the Colombian Senate is traveling to the Department of Cauca to investigate the violence that has killed several social leaders in recent days. The delegation will be accompanied by the Ombudsman Carlos Negret. They will meet local, indigenous, and community leaders, as well as campesino and Afro-Colombian movements to address the issue.
We're going to be on the ground, firstly to talk to the indigenous communities, to the indigenous guards, to the CRIC and other organizations, as well as the local government. Secondly, these talks will allow us to make a much better diagnosis of what is going on in Cauca. Thirdly, we need a much clearer understanding of this violence that is killing social leaders in Cauca, and not just accept the simplistic and, in my opinion, irresponsible explanations offered by the government.
What is most worrying is that they continue to deny that there is a problem of targeted murders, which are planned with lists of names in their hands of social leaders who are being killed. We ourselves are victims of genocide, And it's not just about someone pulling the trigger. There may be authorities who are responsible because they let the killings happen or even collaborate with intelligence information, providing weapons or simply not stopping the vehicles with no number plates. That's secular. In Cauca, in Catatumbo, sometimes in Putumayo, this is a way of allowing these killings.
In Mexico, a judge has ordered that former Social Development Minister Rosario Robles be detained pending a trial over corruption. Robles is accused of taking part in an embezzlement scandal that saw about $260 million diverted from welfare program funds during the presidency of Enrique Peña Nieto.
I believe it's an accomplishment that there is no impunity, that authentic rule of law exists. Not like before, which has a crooked state of bribes.
An Italian court has authorized the open arms migrant rescue ship to enter Italian waters. The vessel has spent 13 days stranded at sea with over 140 migrants on board after far-right Italian leader Matteo Salvini prevented them from entering Italian waters.
We have overturned Salvini's decree which banned us from entering Italian waters under the threat of confiscating our boat. We can now enter Italian waters without fear of being fined or having our boat confiscated. This is what I am saying, and also the ruling says these people must be disembarked. But it does not say in which port. Therefore, it's the Italian government which must respond to its administration, its justice system. We shall see how it evolves over the next hours. We'll see what happens. It's important that this decree, which was boosted about so much as a great success, has turned to nothing.
The Iranian oil tanker illegally detained by the United Kingdom in Gibraltar could be released. A hearing is scheduled for July 15th to discuss the fate of the Grace 1 tanker. The Iranian Fars news agency speculated that the vessel could be released on Tuesday night. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se